When I teach theology or philosophy, what I've noticed is that fantasy and fiction works can tell us the truth in ways that get past what we call the watchful dragons, to use mythological language, the watchful dragons of our rational minds that are able to resist truth when it's presented as propositions, and we argue with it and we resist it, and it's somehow we've have ways of deflecting the truth when it's proposed to us. But through fiction and fantasy, we have a truth delivery system that is able to sneak past our rational defenses to speak directly to our hearts. So one thing you'll notice I've just done is I've actually said that fantasy and fiction are true. They're just a different kind of truth. They're a delivery system for truth. And this is what you see Jesus doing all the time with his parables. He's recognizing that there are those who cannot receive the truth if he says it in a straightforward fashion, but he plants it in their hearts through a parable that makes sense to them and connects with their real life situations, and where they actually open up to story in a way that they maybe hadn't. And even for those that the parables obscure the truth for them, it is a little bit like a ticking time bomb inside until there's an aha moment. So I've noticed this just by way of testimony. I've had years of debate, biblical debate, theological debate, rational debate over certain issues, and nothing penetrated my defenses. And then I watch a movie, and 90 minutes later, I've completely changed my mind. And this has happened on a few issues where I'm like, how did that happen? And I think one of the ways that happened is when we talk about theology in an abstract way, it actually is less true because it dehumanizes the topic. When I hear a story, it overcomes that abstraction and becomes real to me. It brings in the human element as story in a way that awakens empathy. So, for example, I'm still on the journey dealing with how I relate to the LGBTQ plus community. I'm aware that my orientation towards them dramatically changed when I watched the movie Philadelphia with Denzel Washington and Tom Hanks, because it was a story that generated empathy. And isn't the incarnation all about empathy? That God stepped into human flesh and experienced directly the human condition that we undergo. And in so doing, it's the most radical act of empathy. So when I'm drawn into empathy through a story or a fiction, then I'm actually becoming more Christ-like. I'm accessing the empathy of God. So and I've noticed this, that then the theological opponents will say, you're just sentimentalizing. It's like, no, I'm humanizing. This is how I begin to see these not as issues, but as people. In fact, our university, we had someone contact us and said they wanted to know our policy on this. And my colleague Peter Fitch was so brilliant. He says, we like to work with people, not policies. And in other words, he was saying that I can't make some kind of abstract ruling without reference to the real lives and stories of people. Well, those lives and stories are often told in fictional ways, and you could do a biography, that would help. But in fiction, it tends to make it like, oh, this can be anybody's story. And I step into the story and experience it instead of looking at it sort of like from above and outside the situation. So I found all that very helpful. So when I teach existentialism, I have them read Dostoevsky's novel, Crime and Punishment. I have them read Camus, his novel, The Plague. And I see those stories deeply penetrating and troubling people, where a conversation about the 7 points of existentialism would have no impact other than intellectual. What's Dostoevsky up to in Crime and Punishment? We have a man who thinks he can live beyond good and evil. And then when he tries it, his conscience begins to torment him to the point of fevers and delirium. And a policeman in the story knows he did it and could probably arrest him, but he keeps interrogating him because he knows that won't save the man. Arresting him and sending him to prison doesn't change his heart, but if he can get him to confess, maybe there would be hope for him. Well, the man, his heart is so hard that that's not working. And then you have this young woman, a prostitute named Sonia, come along, and she upsets all our judgments about the sex trade because we find out she loves Jesus. We find out she's underage and she's doing this to feed her family because her father's a drunk. What happens? Well, she runs into the murderer whose heart is so cold, but when she weeps for him, her tears begin to melt his heart. And that's his salvation. And so the theme of all of Dostoevsky's novels seems to include this, that the only power we have to transform another human being is through co-suffering love. And that this is what Christ has done for us. He entered the world as co-suffering. That's what compassion literally means, co-suffering love. And that maybe I don't have all the answers or arguments for people, but if I can walk with people and weep for them the tears they can't even weep, that this could actually be their salvation. So that's how I would teach that novel. It's a work of genius and transformation.